Hello. In this video, I'd like to give you an overview of some of the sources that anyone interested in Jedi philosophy will want to read and look into. These are books and topics that have helped me and that I often refer to on this channel. So the first one is Star Wars and Philosophy. More powerful than you can possibly imagine. This is edited by Kevin S. Decker and Jason T. Eberl. And this is a collection of essays on different philosophies and where they can be found in the Star Wars films. So it's a good overview. Another book is The Dharma of Star Wars by Matthew Bortolin. And this one is specifically talking about Buddhism in Star Wars and Buddhist themes in Star Wars. But seeing as that Buddhism is one of the most major influences on the Jedi philosophy, it's good that there's an entire book dedicated to that. And then there is Stoicism by John Sellers. The themes from that philosophy can be found throughout the Star Wars films, and this particular book is what I believe is really one of the best books on Stoicism. And then a book on Buddhism is Buddhist Life, Buddhist Path by Bhikkhu Chintita. The reason I like this book a lot is because it focuses on early Buddhism. Buddhism is vast, and there's a lot of different schools of Buddhism and a lot of different variations of interpretation and what have you. Early Buddhism is the core and where you'll find most of the overlap between Buddhism and Stoicism and the themes of the Jedi. And then a book I would recommend is Living Presence, A Sufi Way to Mindfulness and the Essential Self. And then this next book may seem out of left field, but it's not a book of philosophy. It is a science book, a popular science book. It's not highly technical or anything, but it's called Complexity, the Emerging Science at the Edge of Order and Chaos. So what's interesting about the field of complex systems theory is that in a formal scientific way, it attempts to look at dynamic complex systems which can be found throughout all of nature. And a lot of the things that it realizes are things that you will find touched upon, especially in things like Taoism and early Buddhism, and in even in the West in the writings of Heracles. But of course, in a more modern, formal, mathematical sense. Nevertheless, this book, Complexity, will really, if you're not familiar with complex systems theory, will really change the way you look at the world. So anyway, we'll get into more of that in future videos. And then a final of the major books that I would recommend on this is Exploring Spiritual Naturalism Year 1. Now, this is an anthology of articles from the Spiritual Naturalist Society, which is the organization that I founded, and it is, and I still serve on their council. The Spiritual Naturalist Society looks at a lot of these kinds of contemplative philosophies that involve meditation and mindfulness, but that don't require any particular religious belief. So they could be ideas useful to anyone. And that puts them also in the ballpark of things that the Jedi talk about, and that people who are interested in Jedi and Star Wars might be interested in a lot of these ideas. Those are some of the really good essential sources. Some other books of interest that I might mention include Chuang Tzu, Essential Writings. This is translated by Burton Watson. And Chuang Tzu is a Taoist philosopher, or influential in Taoism, a Chinese philosopher. And you'll hear with Taoism, you'll more often hear about Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. But I think that Chuang Tzu is really a philosopher whose works connect Taoism with nature and have the most overlap with Jedi perspectives. So we're going to be getting into Chuang Tzu at some point in the future too. Another of the kind of secondary books you might be interested in, The Places That Scare You, A Guide to Fearlessness in Difficult Times. Now this is by Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist nun, and this book is all about how to go into places that can be painful or scary in order to help other people and stay strong and centered and focused in those conditions. Kind of thing a hero or a Jedi might be doing. And while we in real life are not going to be facing General Grievous or Sith lords or anything like that, we do have very scary things and very painful things that need to be faced in life. And when that happens, this book has some great perspectives and practices for that. For example, some people really love animals, but because of that, they find it difficult to go to places where they could help take care of animals because sometimes an animal will not be able to be saved. And then, of course, the same thing for people. There's a lot of places where that are full of sadness and difficulty, but that people need help. So that's a good book. And then a lot of people talk about Joseph Campbell and his writings and lectures. He wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And this was all about the hero's journey, which was very influential in Star Wars. Those works are good for understanding the themes in Star Wars overall, but they're not quite as central to the Jedi's philosophies in particular. But nevertheless, that could be a book that you'd be interested in. And then another that is worth mentioning is The Teachings of Don Juan, A Yahweh Way to Knowledge by Carlos Castaneda. Now this book is about opening one's feelings and consciousness, and in particular in altered states of consciousness and the kinds of awareness of subtle things that can come into perception in these cases. A fascinating book, and we'll have to get more into depth on that and how it intersects with contemplative philosophies in the future. So the last one I would mention is The Meme Machine by Susan Blackmore. That's M-E-M-E. It's part of the field of memetics. Now everyone's heard of memes when it comes to like cat memes on the internet and things like that, but that word actually comes from a real, a much more sophisticated concept. Memetics is the idea of ideas being something that reproduce similar to genes, and they propagate within our minds. And I'll go into future videos. I'll go into more on that. Now, there's a few other topics you might want to look into, read up on: the Knights Templar, the samurai and their code, which is called Bushido, Shaolin monks, Zoroastrianism, for its themes of dark and light, good and evil, and the writings of Carl Jung, particularly Jungian archetypes, those could come into play in understanding Jedi philosophy. But really, those first books that I mentioned are what we're going to be mainly starting out with, and I'll go into detail on these core traditions, particularly Stoicism, Buddhism, Taoism. And so this video has just been about giving you an overview of some of those sources. And so we'll see you soon. May the Force be with you.